We are live.
Good morning, everyone. It's Norm and Mike. We're back with Law and Legitimacy, and we're having some technological issues this morning because yours truly forgot to bring his charge cord with him into the office, and my laptop from which I usually broadcast is DEAD or on its way to being dead. So I'm doing this from the PC. Welcome. Are you feeling like a threat today, a terrorist threat, Mike? Because you're looking like one. I mean,
Am I really? Am I that handsome?
No, you're white. I mean, what's up with Joe Biden at Howard University? I could not be more offended by his speech that suggests that the greatest terroristic threat to the United States is white supremacy. And the notion that somehow an assertion. Well, I mean, I don't know what he means by that, and I'd like to find out if you have.
You mean this speech? You want to hear it?
Yeah. Well, no. Do I want my blood pressure to rise first thing in the morning? I suppose so. Maybe then I'd remember what it is I'm supposed to bring.
Well, here we go. We're going to do it anyway.
We know that American history has not always been a fairy tale. From the start, it's been a constant push and pull for more than 240 years between the best of us, the American ideal that we're all created equal, and the worst of us, the harsh reality that racism has long torn us apart. It's a battle that's never really over. But on the best days, enough of us have the guts and the hearts to stand up for the best in us, to choose love over hate, unity over disunion, progress over retreat, to stand up against the poison white supremacy, as I did my inaugural address, to single out as the most dangerous terrorist threat to our homeland is white supremacy. I'm not saying this because I'm of the black HBCU.
All right, let's move on.
I say wherever I go. Stand up for truth over lies, lies told for power and profit. To confront the ongoing assault to subvert our elections, suppress our right to vote.
This guy is a clown.
He is and he isn't. I mean, I spent an interesting weekend. I was in North Carolina this weekend, and I survived. It was the most amazing thing, Mike. I get off the airplane Friday night, and I'm in the airport, and people are speaking English there, and they're polite, and there was food that I could eat, and people were nice. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, isn't this where Boyer lives?
Yeah, man, we got running water. We got all the specifics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I was amazed. And so I went to a commencement service for a good friend of mine's son, friend of the show, Jim Nugent at Duke University. He's graduated the law school. And so, as you would expect, the law school was reflecting the current climate of opinion and culture. And so made a great display and discussion in the ceremony of diversity, but they didn't overdo it. And among other things, and I appreciated that, when the class speaker was identified and she was, some obese black woman, I thought, well, here we go. We're going to get worked over on the need for racial justice. And instead, she avoided the topic. She was part of the university's stand-up comic club as well. And so she had a good comedic touch, and she gave a nice commencement speech and managed to avoid talking about DEI and everything else. And I thought, that is a commitment to excellence that I can embrace regardless of the messenger. But my own, I guess, inner racist was triggered when I saw her, because I thought, okay, so they're going to have a class speaker. They're going to pick the fattest, blackest woman that they can to get up there and scream at us about how we don't love her enough. And instead, she got up and gave an appeal to excellence. And then the university also awards what are called LLMs. And it's one of the mysteries of the law, in my view, that, when you get your first law degree, it's a Juris Doctorate. If you want another one, it's an LLM, master's degree. Usually they ascend. So I suppose, you can go back and get it. And another law degree, I don't know what that would be, the baccalaureate,
Yeah. You can get your bachelor's in law.
But they had 37 countries represented in the LLM. And the LLM degree, for those of you who don't know, is often regarded as a sort of finishing school degree for foreign students. They come in with a foreign law degree. They want to get their feet wet in American law, and a law school can make some decent money educating foreign lawyers on the basics of American law in an LLM program. And there are other concentrations as well. So I went to the reception thereafter, and it was in a hall. And around the perimeter of the hall were the flags of many nations draped. And I watched the crowd interact, and I watched the group of LLM students receive their degrees. And I listened to the commencement speaker struggle with the pronunciation of many names because some of the names just were a mouthful, even if you practice them. And I thought, this is a good thing. You know, however many of us there are wandering the face of the earth, 8 or 9 billion, I've lost the count. Lost count rather, you know, we need to learn to live together in something like peace and harmony. And so I give Duke credit for hosting that endeavor and bringing lawyers from around the world to work together to devise a common set of norms which make life together possible. And I give the university credit for the selection, and the student body credit for the selection of speakers who reflected diversity without making diversity a thing. And that's what I appreciated about Duke and what I despise about Biden's speech at Howard. You know, the notion that you're going to go to a historically black college and demonize white supremacy, that would be the equivalent of my going to a university with a mostly white enrollment and saying, you know, the threat to American security right now is black extremism. And, you know, to the degree that California wants to endorse race-based transfer payments, it is driving a stake into the heart of the American soul.
It's more like this, Norm. It's more like you doing that when the context for you doing so is, number one, you've lost considerable ground in the polls with that voting demographic to which you're speaking, but en masse. Two, you are presiding over the largest border crisis in modern history of this country, right? Looking to assuage issues that are attendant to that. And three, you would do so if you have no realistic prospect of running a campaign by traditional standards and need every ounce of your public appearance to go to the benefit of your 2024 election campaign. Those are the three things that I have personally assessed that explain why he would charge Howard University a campaign tax of that nature, right? Because that's ultimately what it was his pandering. No different from Hillary saying she keeps hot sauce in her purse, right? No different from Joe Biden in the last election saying, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, right? This is a demographic that he's carried, that the Democrat Party has carried. And we talked about the polls that came out last week that talked about how far behind not only Trump he is, but how far he has fallen with Black Americans as well.
Let's try to take, I get that. And those are all great points. And I hadn't even thought of it in that way. And you referring to it as a tax imposed on Howard is certainly a nice turn of phrase. But let's take him for a moment at face value. What does he mean by white supremacy? I mean, it seems to me that if there are 100 people in a room and they are demographically mixed, and X% are black, X% are Hispanic, X% are Asian, X% are other, and X% are white, whatever that may mean. And the other groups decide that the group that is white has more of something that the other groups want. And they say to the white people, give it to us because that would be fair. And the white people say, I don't think it would be. I worked for it. You should work for it yourself. Does that make the white person who refuses to give it up a supremacist? Or does it make the person who's asking for it entitled? And so my view is I every time I hear the term white supremacism, I tune right out and I start thinking this is identitarian entitlement. And you're not entitled to a piece of me because you seem to think it would be fairer if you had more of me. And that doesn't make me a white supremacist. It makes me pissed off. And it makes me conclude that somebody's on the hustle and somebody's on the make. And in this case, it was Joe Biden. As you point out, Joe Biden pandering for votes. But listen to the crowd reaction. The crowd roared at that. And that somehow he was empowering a sense of, in my view, black extremism, black entitlement. And that, more than anything else, is going to divide the country. I mean, look at what's going on in San Francisco. Now the board of commissioners, or whatever it is that the city's governing body is getting prepared to endorse a claim for reparations. Is that going to make San Francisco a better place to live? Or are taxpayers just going to say, wait a minute, this is another tax I'm paying for what? And if you're a business owner in San Francisco, are you really going to sit there and continue to work within the city's borders when you can move your business elsewhere with less of an imposition on the transactional cost of doing business? So, I don't know,
This is from the Politico article that covered this speech as well. And I'm just going to read it directly for those audio only listeners. It says in relevant part here, quote, "But despite some strong audience applause, Biden's message was not entirely well received. The crowd of graduates was dotted with student signs criticizing the Biden-Harris administration's treatment of African Americans. Quote, a black child was lynched yesterday," one sign read, referencing the May 1st killing of 30-year-old Jordan Neely on a New York subway, while another student's cap said, quote, "Biden and Harris don't care about black people." Still another read, "Stand up, fight back, black people under attack." The seventh sitting president to deliver Howard's commencement address, Biden received an honorary Doctor of Letters from the HBCU. Biden's vice president, Kamala Harris, graduated from Harvard. So I share that to say that we shouldn't take for granted.
Put that back up for a minute, though.
Okay, one moment. But I say that to counter a little bit of what you were sensing, that the crowd was going crazy over this. I think that the video does a little bit to show that the people certainly behind him seem to be pleased by the comments, but I don't think it's a given that Black Americans find any quarter with these sorts of comments. If anything, I would think that Black Americans are beginning to tire. Well, not even beginning. I think that they're beginning to realize that most Black Americans are tired of being pandered to in that way.
Those signs don't reflect it. Those signs reflect that they don't think Biden went far enough. I mean, a black child was lynched yesterday, referring to Jordan Neely. That's not a lynching. Jordan Neely was shaking people down, behaving in a menacing fashion on a subway. He was restrained and he died. He wasn't selected because he was black and strung up for the entertainment and gratification of others. He was a mentally ill person behaving in a menacing way on a subway. He was restrained and he died. How does that become a lynching? Which histrionic gene has to be dominant for somebody to look at that, call it a lynching? And what part of us doesn't look at a sign like that and say, oh, come on, grow up, get it together. That's not what that was. And then look at the other. Stand up, fight back. Black people under attack. Where exactly? Where is that attack taking place? In a community where we've defunded the police and where we've enacted bail reform and there's a revolving door criminal justice system and officers are afraid to exert force for fear that if someone gets hurt, they'll be charged with a crime? Is that where black people are under attack? I'm just, Mike, to me, those signs suggest the opposite, that Biden hadn't gone far enough to at least appease the radicals within that crowd, or the extremists within that crowd. And from my perspective, I don't want to hear about white supremacists as extremism and as terrorism. What about looking at these signs? What's going on with these knuckleheads?
Well, look, these are a select couple of signs right here, and they were kind of looked like they were smuggled in. I don't know if it was specifically for the photo op, right? But you've got two that are. I mean, just look at the staging of this photo with Biden in the background there. And then you've got these two things that were kind of smuggled in, and it looks like it might even be the same handwriting or close there too. But so I don't mean to suggest that, explicitly that this was staged, but it is a very opportunistic photo for there to be someone with a camera, from this angle, this lens. It just, they're trying to tell something very specific, but it would, I think that this distracts from what I heard in that interview, which is, and I agree, severe conservative. But here's what I see with that. And I'm going to put what I had back on the screen there. He said, stand up for truth over lies, lies told for power and profit. That entire speech, the 1 minute and 26 seconds, was nothing but projection. Nothing but projection. This administration has been so embattled with scandal, has not has not honored its campaign promises to any of the demographics that voted for it. And for him to stand up there, a shell of himself, stumbling through his stuff to talk about standing up for truth over lies, lies told for power and profit, while we have a border crisis, we are sending billions into a foreign war, right? Threatening with kind of flirting with some sort of nuclear entanglement. And also at the same time, we have a House Oversight Committee subpoenaing various people within his camp, right, and the Justice Department for records related to his deals as VP and Ford that do exactly that, that tell a story of him using his position of power and his ability to frame things purely for profit, personal profit.
Yeah. Well, it's
amazing projection from that stage.
Can I say this about a white guy talking at a black college reunion or a commencement? It's the pot calling the kettle black. Does that make me a racist? I don't know.
It's just interesting that he's the guy up there, no bones about saying that about white supremacy, right? White supremacy is your enemy, coming from an 82-year-old white guy who's been in politics for 50 years and is embattled in every potential kind of scandal that you can think of, from the weird photo ops with young children to his son smoking crack, getting prostitutes, to him using his power and leverage as VP to get people in Ukraine pulled out of the Justice Department over there, color revolutions that resulted in Zelensky presiding over that, and then spending billions in American taxpayer dollars to fund a war that no one here even asked for, while neglecting egregiously what's going on domestically here. There is civil strife, there is domestic strife, there is domestic polarization, and there is an issue of a total lack of assimilation because no one can even recognize American values anymore. And then he's like, but everything else is white supremacy. That's all white supremacy, not me. Whatever, man. Whatever, meat sack.
Meat sack. Well, that's well put. And as Severe Conservative puts it, good rant, Mike. I don't know that I'd call him meat sack, but I do know this. When I am encouraging everyone who's listening, when you're out and about in a political debate or in a political context, and you hear somebody use the expression white supremacy, to turn the conversation on a dime and say, what is it you want exactly? What is it you want to be given? Because a claim for white supremacy is usually a claim of ethnic or racial entitlement by somebody who's not white. Their view is they want more of what they perceive you as having because they perceive you as having gotten it at their expense. That might come as a surprise to most of us who get up out of bed every morning and work our asses off in competitive marketplaces for such livings as we can maintain. And I think that the degree to which we and our aspirations are marginalized and called white supremacists is quite frankly divisive. And I've had enough of Joe. Let's take a look at this Daniel Penny case and decode it. Because, in the Howard thing, this was a black lynching, according to the knucklehead who wrote that sign. Penny's been charged with second-degree manslaughter. So let's decode this and drive race out of it. We know that Penny was a black man. We know that Penny died as a result. I think it's true that Penny died as a result of a chokehold, and that the person imposing the chokehold was white. So what? They were two human beings in a subway. And what we know about Neely is that he had a history of mental health problems, a long history of arrests, assault arrests, and that he had mental health issues, was homeless apparently, and in need. So he's on the subway. He's a Michael Jackson impersonator, apparently. But on the day that he died, he was doing something other than impersonating Michael Jackson. He was making demands of strangers for their regard. And some of the strangers in the car felt threatened by him, and he may have threatened some of them. And so if a person got up and restrained him, he restrained him for what reason? That will be at the heart of this case. Now, Daniel Bragg, or Alvin Bragg, rather, the Manhattan DA has charged or seen fit to have Penny charged with second-degree manslaughter. All taking of life is potentially criminal, and it's called homicide. The various states have legal codes that distinguish one form of homicide from another. murder is the intention to take a person's life. Manslaughter is doing so with a less culpable mental state. In New York, we're looking at the statute now. Manslaughter in the second degree is in this case recklessly causing the death of another person. A reckless causation of death is when you do something with an awareness of a substantial risk of harm, but you do it anyhow. Here is the statute. A person who creates such a risk but is unaware thereof solely by reason of involuntary, wrong. A person acts recklessly with respect to a result or to a circumstance described by a statute defining an offense when he is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that something bad will happen. So the claim here will be that Daniel Perry, in placing the chokehold around Neely, was aware that that chokehold could cause death, and he disregarded that risk in an unjustifiable way. And so the defense of that case will focus entirely on the moments leading up to the decision to place Neely in a chokehold, the duration of the chokehold, Neely's behavior during the chokehold, and what circumstances led Penny to continue to keep him in a chokehold. If you've seen the video, it's apparent that Neely was struggling while he was restrained. Now you can say he was fighting for his life. That's fine, and he may well have been. He may also have been fighting in a way that suggested that he was going to continue to engage in threatening behavior. Penny's decision to restrain him was it justified or not? And most of us don't run around placing people in chokeholds. So I think from Bragg's perspective, that decision in and of itself was questionable. He may or may not be able to show that Penny was aware of a risk of death from a chokehold. He was a Marine. He was trained in force. That may work against Penny. On the other hand, there is a public safety rationale as well. You can restrain another person to protect yourself against danger and to protect a third party against danger. Neely's got some lawyers. I know of them through the market of lawyering in Manhattan, and these are a couple young black lawyers who are very much on the make. They proclaim to others known to them that they want to be, the black go-to personal injury lawyers, the Johnny Cochrans of New York personal injury law. And so they ask, what's wrong? No one on the train asked Jordan, what's wrong? How can I help you? He was choked to death. What's wrong with us? They ask. Well, maybe what's wrong with us is when we get on the subway, we don't want to get shaken down over and over and over again. We don't want to be threatened by the person with whom we have just been assaulted or shaken or asked for something with a subtle threat of violence if we don't give them something. How many times have you walked by a person on a busy municipal street who's asked you for $1? Hey, can you buy me something to eat? Can you give me this? Will you please? Not usually will you please. Give me this, give me that. I need $1. Give me this. You don't, and they're muttering under your breath as you walk by. Do you clutch your purse a little bit more as the muttering begins? Do you make sure you know which pocket your wallet is in? Is that the price that we expect to pay for appearing in public? These young men say, well, our response should be when somebody says, I need $1. Oh, sure. Would you like that in quarters or a bill? Can I give it to you in dimes? May I write you a check? I mean, at some point, we should be permitted to go outside. We should be able to expect to go outside without being accosted by strangers. So these two hustlers want us to say that somehow it's society's fault, and therefore Penny should pay the price. That we were unwilling, each of us, to stop about doing what we do in our daily lives to render assistance to someone that society has failed. Arguably, yeah, that's true. Society failed Neely, but what's the solution? Is the solution the prosecution of Daniel Penny because society has chosen to deinstitutionalize? Is the solution to put Penny in prison because we don't know how to deal with an emergent mental health crisis? Is the solution to demonize a white guy because the mentally ill person who behaved in a menacing manner and was restrained happened to be black? And are we going to racialize this and try to make Neely into the new, George Floyd here on the cusp of the long, hot summer of 2023? I don't know what the answers to all of these are, but I know the narrow legal question will leave race out of it altogether. And the situation between Neely and Penny should not be evaluated in terms of race. Severe Conservative asks, under what theory can Neely's criminal record be put into evidence? There probably isn't one, unless that theory was known to Penny. And I doubt very seriously that Penny could have picked this guy out of a lineup or knew him from Adam. So what Neely was capable of, based on his past experience, is unlikely to be known to this jury, and probably shouldn't be, because
Norm, may I just want to build on what he's asking as well here. So, in what circumstance would the prosecution potentially open themselves up to that sort of evidence being entered into the record? I'm thinking something to the effect of you starting this by saying that he was a Michael Jackson impersonator, that he, if they start getting into his background as a person and, how loving he was and this, that, and the third, is it likely that the defense would just, that's a mistake that I don't think this prosecution would make, not the Manhattan District's attorney, but essentially when we're talking about evidence, if character evidence is going to be barred as unnecessarily probative, right? Or a prejudicial to the defendant or to the deceased, right? To the prosecution's case, then I think they're not going to make that mistake. But that is the sort of evidence, correct, that would open up that door.
So if you're defending the case, if you're defending Daniel Penny, you want Neely's past to come into evidence.
Absolutely. I think that that's probably the most probative of what this situation was. It wasn't what this ambitious attorney who's hustling to be, the next Johnny Cochran is saying, that you should ask him, if what do you need? What do you need? What can I give you? Right? That's not it. His character evidence would say that if he's been arrested 40 something times, right? If he kidnapped a 7-year-old, if he's beat up people on the subway in the past, right? All of that character evidence would go to say that, hey, perhaps what Daniel Penny was reacting to wasn't at all a someone who was just, I don't know, was a little bit hungry and didn't need to be put in a chokehold. So that's the narrative that's being built in the media.
And that narrative is unlikely to be tried in a courtroom. I mean, if you're the trial judge, you want to make sure that the jury is focused on the elements of the offense. So, and the elements of the offense are, was his life, did Penny cause Neely's death? If so, what was Neely's state of mind when he caused his death?
Yeah, was he reckless? Did he cause the death, and was he reckless in doing so?
From a perspective, you want the jury to understand as well as it can what Penny was facing when Neely confronted him. So if the prosecution says Neely was simply a homeless man hungry in need that day, and this was out of character for him, well, that's an obvious door opening that the defense would drive a Mack truck through. To the degree that the prosecution suggests that, it's going to tempt the defense to try to open that door. And in a well-conducted trial, the defense would take this issue up outside the jury's presence and ask for permission to introduce evidence of Neely's violent predisposition. The court will then engage in what's called a balancing test. It will balance the probative value of the man's past, of Neely's past, against the danger of undue prejudice. And there isn't a right answer. There isn't a formulaic answer that I can give you, Mike, or I can give our listeners on how this will unfold in trial. It's context specific. On appeal, an appellate court will ask whether the judge abused his discretion, in deciding to admit or exclude this evidence. If the state loses and Penny wins, well, the case is over because the state can't appeal an acquittal of that sort of information. If Penny seeks to offer evidence of this sort and loses, and the judge keeps it out, he can take that up on an appeal. But appealing on the abuse of discretion standard is really pretty hard. It's hard to overturn a judge on that basis.
A couple of things here, because this is starting to rhyme a bit with the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin case. But I want to make sure that when we're talking about cause of death, that we're really accurate here. I think the coroner's report said that it was death by strangulation, but we still haven't seen a blood test. We haven't seen any sort of analysis of perhaps what Neely had subjected himself to prior to this subway encounter. I strongly expect that if and when that blood report comes back, that there will be the presence of at least one or more illicit substances in his bloodstream. And if that is the case, I think that is one of the things that the defense will obviously want to attack to mitigate against causation just applying wholesale, right?
Yeah, that's difficult. So, if
you might not even want to waste time with that because it could actually alienate the jury. I think that you start getting into this guessing game of how persuasive is this, and what do we look like as a defense team, and what do we do to our client if we try to take this road and frame it as, well, he choked him, but he didn't actually cause his death. If the guy hadn't have been on meth, and again, this hasn't been confirmed, so I'm just kind of playing this out a little bit. I do think that on the reckless side, that the defense has a huge opportunity here to really illustrate for the jury what reckless means. And from the videos that we've seen, based on eyewitness testimony and what's been reported, right? And the mitigating factor of him, putting him in the left lateral recovery position, that certainly goes to something else, right? His state of mind. Recklessness is far above and beyond that, right? And
I don't know. I mean, reckless. I mean, you have to evaluate the application of force from the perspective of the time at which force is used. And so, was he justified in placing Neely in a chokehold? And was he justified in the length of the chokehold? So, for example, in the Zimmerman case, there was no question in my mind that Zimmerman brought the need for use of force upon himself, nor was there any question in my mind that Derek Chauvin was justified initially in the takedown. Did Chauvin leave his knee on the upper body and or neck of Zimmerman too long? That was an open question in my mind. So similarly with Penny, he may have been justified in restraining the man. Was he justified in maintaining the hold? And, he's not trained as a police officer. He's not authorized to use force on behalf of the public good. And so I think that Penny has to launch something like a defense of self or other claim to justify the use of force in the first instance.
But from a legal analysis, doesn't that come after? I mean, we're talking about defending against the charge. So, he's innocent until proven guilty. So that is the nature of due process. But if the two elements are causation and recklessness, if we're talking about defense of self, defense of others, that's an affirmative defense that is a completely separate showing, correct? Just from analyzing the legal. So if you're listening to this or watching at home, please understand that you're proven. You can still be found legally liable or guilty of a second-degree murder charge, but you may be found not responsible, or there could be some sort of affirmative defense that will relieve you of punishment. That is what Norm is speaking to now, which would be self-defense or defense of others. And I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, Norm. I know we're running out of time.
No, that's right. I mean, what I'm trying to focus on is the issue that is confusing to me in this case. Had a police officer used the chokehold there, it would be a far easier case in some respects for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, because they're told to avoid chokeholds because of the substantial risk of death or serious physical injury of compressing carotid arteries. A civilian who chooses to use one is a different analysis. And in some respects, it's easier for the DA. In some respects, it's harder. So, the state has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Police officers are trained to use it. They're supposed to use it with respect under the guidance of certain standards. Citizens don't have that monopoly, but citizens don't have to stand by and take any abuse that's hurled at them. You have the right to defend yourself and or others. So first question is, was Penny justified in using force at all? The second question is, was he justified in using force to the extent and to the degree that he did? And one of those justifications would be self-defense. So as Mike was saying, typically in a case, the state proves that a defendant caused the death of another person, and then the jury is asked to determine whether that causation was justified by means of the doctrine of self-defense. And so I think that Penny, Penny's going to need some good lawyers. And I recommended Steve Metcalf out of New York City the other day. I don't know if he's gotten the case yet. He should. I think the lawyers that Penny have.
Well, a note on that, Norm. So T-Girl's in the chat. Good morning to everybody on Rumble as well. Pete Atkinson is here. Me again is here. I think I saw Freedom Lover. Yep. Says two interesting things here. One, she says 3 men were slashed on an NYC subway yesterday. So haven't looked into any of the facts there. Then T-Girl goes on to say Penny's lawyer ran against Bragg for Manhattan DA, which that is yet to be confirmed by LAL. But T-Girl, you are a reputable source and reliable.
I've seen that reported in multiple sources. Yeah.
So that's interesting when you talk about needing for different defense counsel. I hope that Daniel Penny is not the victim of some sort of ego-driven desire on the part of his defense counsel, because that is a severe vulnerability if so.
Well, and I fear that it would be. Many years ago, I represented a woman in Manhattan named Anna Christina. She was known as the soccer mom madam. And a guy named Pete Gleason, who was a Republican candidate for DA, got onto the defense team. And he was, ask yourself, if you're a Republican in Manhattan and you're running for district attorney, don't you have anything better to do? There are other ways to waste your time, like
and other people's money.
So Gleason did not bring a lot of legal skill to the proceedings, and ultimately wasn't at the end of the case, although he tried to claim credit for it. And I suspect that this guy who's ran against Bragg probably has more time than skill, and Penny really does need to be looking around for a better lawyer than the one he has. The press releases that they're putting out talking about the mental health crisis in New York don't address the issue at all. This is a narrow legal question on whether the application of force was justified and what was in Penny's state of mind as he perceived Neely in the subway that day. As to the overwhelming sense, in my view, what I read about, there's a sense of menace in the subways. I wouldn't travel on a New York subway, period. At this point in time, I had to be in Manhattan not long ago. I took an Uber from where I had to go at considerably more expense. I'll be arguing in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York. I won't take a subway to get to the courthouse that day, I just won't get in it. But plenty of people have no choice. And if you are trapped in that sardine can and of necessity have to ride it from point A to B to get to your job or take care of your children, how much do you have to take before you can say no? And, from Neely's lawyer's perspective, you have to take it all. You have to pay for the privilege of being abused. And if somebody asks for something, say, can I give more? And that's just not how the rest of us want to live. Now, does that make us white supremacists? It might, in their view. And then the turnaround question from my view is, well, which part of Black entitlement should have governed the interaction between Penny and Neely?
And look, because then there's also the question from It's Me Again, where was Neely's family when he was alive? Which it gets to exactly what you were just saying, right? You've got these attorneys that are obviously advocating on behalf of of their client's estate by and through some administrator or executor that's been appointed, right? For purposes of this case, they're making the decisions on behalf when it will come to the civil stuff. But if Neely was homeless, Michael Jackson impersonator, arrested over 40 times, and is hungry on the subway, accosting members of the public, what relationship did he have with his family, if at all? And at what point are we righting a wrong that he didn't himself create or he didn't himself create, by and through his family in a life that no one really knows about? We have this one tiny glimpse of this man's life.
How many millions of dollars did George Floyd's family get paid for his death?
Unreal.
Unreal.
But the good thing is, it looks like Daniel Penny has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars via GoFundMe for his legal defense. I suspect that is going to be what hedges against him being able to change lawyers at this point. That's a lot of money coming through. But that is, I think, a decent sign of the public's state of mind around this, that he's able to very quickly raise that kind of money.
Well, let's see. It's the Bernie Getz case of our time, and we'll be watching it and following it more here on Law and Legitimacy. So getting warmed up for May 18th, Thursday night, 10 o'clock, Mohegan Sun, get the Comics Roadhouse in Norwich, Connecticut. Be there. It's a $10 admissions fee. I think half a dozen or so other amateur stand-up comics will be showing you why we're amateurs, looking for a few laughs and trying to perfect our craft. You'll be introduced to Ned the Coffin Salesman that night if you appear. More said about that later.
$1.9 million in legal fees raised so far for Penny. So
wow.
Just consider that. $17 million to George Floyd's family. Thank you. It's me again in the Rumble chat. Thank you for those quick stats.
Yeah, call me here, Jordan.
Another quick stats. Jason Tatum gave the Sixers 51 points last night in Game 7.
Wow.
The Boston Celtics are on their way to the Eastern Conference Finals. You want to make a prediction of a Celtics-Lakers finals? It'll be like the NBA of your era, Norm. We'll have the two most dominant, prolific franchises in NBA history meeting again in the finals. LeBron in his 20th season, Jason Tatum, the rising young star. Unbelievable. 51 in Game 7 of the playoffs. Unreal.
Well, I'm interested all of a sudden, and I'm learning from you. Basketball's beyond my skill set. It's not yours, so let's stay focused on that. I did watch the Knicks lose to the Miami Heat Friday night and Saturday night, I guess it was, and I whined a little bit, but that's life, you know.
Yeah, that's life. Anyway, thank you for everybody listening this morning. We had a lot more viewers on YouTube this morning than is typical. We always appreciate that. A lot of my poor Knicks, Mike, Justin Carter. Yeah, you're poor Knicks, man, but you do that to yourself. That's the cross you bear. You're like a Cleveland Browns fan for basketball. Anyway, sorry about that, Justin. Anyway, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Google Play, etc. If you don't catch the live stuff, please consider becoming a member on Locals. That's locals.lawandlegitimacy.com or the reverse of that, whatever it is. And then obviously we're here every morning, 8 a.m., YouTube Live, Rumble Live. Norm, I think this is the longest we've gone on a Monday morning in quite some time. So we've got more. We didn't get to Elon and his appointment of Linda Yaccarino. We didn't get to talk about the Wall Street Journal article regarding TikTok. I think we should pick up both of those items tomorrow.
All right, that works. Sounds like a plan. See you tomorrow, folks.
Good. See you tomorrow. Norm will come with his charger tomorrow, everybody, as well. So see you later, Norm.
Ciao.